A Hell's Angel found a toddler locked inside a sweltering car. Seconds later, the heat came off the parking lot in waves, thick and shimmering, like the whole world was melting at the edges. Tank Morrison eased his Harley into Miller's grocery just past 2 in the afternoon. The sun sitting high and mean in a sky bleached almost white. Sweat had already soaked through the back of his shirt, plastering it to his skin, but he barely noticed. 45 years of Georgia summers had taught him how to live with heat like this. You didn't fight it. You just moved slow and let it pass through you. He rolled up to the pump nearest the store entrance and killed the engine. The sudden quiet felt strange after the low rumble of the bike, replaced by the hum of a struggling air conditioner unit above the store's doors and the far-off drone of cicadas in the tree line behind the lot. Tank swung his leg over the seat and stood, joints popping the way they always did these days. Getting older wasn't for the weak, that was for sure. He pulled off his sunglasses and hooked them on his collar, squinting up at the Miller's grocery sign. Same faded red letters it had worn for the last 20 years. Same cracked pavement. Same everything. Tank liked that about this place. In a life that had taken more from him than it ever gave back, there was something steady about a gas station that never changed. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. Afternoon, Tank. He looked over to see Ruth, the cashier, waving at him through the store's front window. She had to be pushing 80, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and reading glasses that hung from a beaded chain around her neck. She'd been ringing up groceries at Miller's since before Tank ever rode a motorcycle, and she never once flinched at his leather vest or the ink covering his arms. Most folks in town had learned better than to judge Tank Morrison by his cover, but Ruth had never needed the lesson to begin with. Tank lifted a hand and gave her a nod, the corner of his mouth twitching into something close to a smile. "Ruth, hot enough for you?" "Hot enough to fry an egg on my counter," she called back through the glass, fanning herself with a folded receipt. "You be careful out there on that bike. This heat'll cook you alive." "I'll manage," Tank said, and he meant it. He'd survived worse than a Georgia heat wave. 2 tours overseas had taught him that the body could take a lot more than people gave it credit for. It was the mind that usually gave out first. He turned to the pump, swiped his card, and pulled the nozzle free from its cradle. The gas glugged into the tank in slow, steady pulses, and Tank leaned against the Harley's seat, letting his eyes wander over the parking lot while he waited. A few cars came and went. A woman loaded groceries into her trunk 2 rows over. A teenager on a skateboard rattled across the far end of the lot, weaving between parked cars with the careless confidence only teenagers seemed to have. Tank breathed in the smell of gasoline and hot asphalt, mixing with the faint sweetness of cut grass from somewhere nearby. It was a simple moment, nothing special about it, the kind of afternoon that blurred into 100 others just like it. He had nowhere he needed to be, nothing pressing on his mind besides the ride home and maybe a cold drink once he got there. Diesel had mentioned something about grilling out at the clubhouse this weekend. Tank figured he'd swing by for that. The pump clicked off, the tank full. Tank capped it, the metal warm under his fingers from sitting in the sun, and reached for his wallet tucked in his back pocket. That was when he heard it. A thin, panicked wail cut through the parking lot noise, high and desperate, the kind of sound that didn't belong in an ordinary afternoon. Tank froze, his hand still resting against his wallet, every muscle in his body suddenly alert. His eyes snapped up, scanning the rows of parked cars, trying to catch the sound again, trying to pin down exactly where it had come from. There it was again. That cry. Tank moved before he even finished the thought. His legs carried him across the parking lot fast, faster than a man his size and age had any business moving, boots slapping hard against the hot pavement. He wove between a pickup truck and a minivan, his eyes scanning every row, every car, following that sound like a lifeline. The cry grew louder as he passed the second row. It was a strange sound, that cry, not the normal fuss of a tired kid or a hungry baby. This was something else, something raw and desperate, thin around the edges like it was running out of steam. Tank had heard men make sounds like that before, in places he tried not to think about anymore. Sounds that came from a body pushed past what it could handle. He rounded the back of an old blue sedan, and that's when he saw her. A little girl, maybe 2 years old, strapped into a car seat in the back of the sedan. Her face was a deep, furious red, like she'd been sitting under a heat lamp for hours. Sweat plastered her dark curls flat against her forehead, and her small chest heaved with each breath, quick and shallow. Her cries had gone ragged, breaking apart into hiccups and whimpers. The kind of crying that came after crying too hard for too long. Tank's stomach dropped straight through the pavement. The windows were cracked, barely an inch at the top, nowhere near enough to let any real air move through that car. Tank could see the heat shimmering off the dashboard from where he stood. He'd been in cars in Georgia summers before, plenty of them, and he knew exactly how fast the inside of a parked car could turn into an oven. 10 minutes was all it took. 15, and you were in real trouble. He didn't know how long this baby had been in there, but looking at her face, at the way her little arms hung limp against the sides of the car seat, he knew it had been too long already. "Hey," Tank said, dropping to a crouch by the window, his voice low and urgent. "Hey, sweetheart, I'm gonna get you out. Hang in there." The girl's eyes fluttered toward him, glassy and unfocused, and that scared Tank more than anything. Babies that age, when they saw a stranger's face that close, they usually pulled back, cried harder, something. This little girl barely reacted. Her cries had gone soft and broken, like she didn't have the strength left to be scared. Tank didn't waste another second thinking. He turned and jogged back to his bike, his heart hammering hard against his ribs, and yanked open the saddlebag. His fingers found the tire iron he kept in there for emergencies, cold steel wrapped in his calloused grip. He was back at the sedan in seconds. He never even noticed the couple of people who had wandered a little closer, drawn by the sound of the crying, phones halfway raised. "Move back," Tank said, not even looking at them. His voice carried the kind of weight that made people listen without arguing. He lined up the tire iron against the back window, the one nearest the car seat, and swung. The glass shattered inward with a hard crack, spraying tiny shards across the seat and the floor of the car. Tank didn't hesitate. He reached through the broken window, careful, his thick forearm brushing away the loose glass still clinging to the frame, and popped the door lock from the inside. The door swung open, and a wave of heat rolled out of the car like opening an oven door, thick and suffocating. Tank leaned in, working the car seat buckle with fingers that felt suddenly too big and too clumsy, cursing under his breath until the clasp finally gave. He gathered the little girl into his arms, cradling her head against his shoulder, his body curling instinctively around her to shield her from the last of the broken glass still scattered across the seat. She was hot to the touch, her skin damp and flushed, and she let out a small, broken whimper against his chest. "Gotcha," Tank murmured, already turning, already moving toward the shade at the edge of the lot. "I gotcha, sweetheart." Behind him, he heard the murmurs starting, voices rising, a small crowd gathering near the shattered window. Phones out, someone already saying the words, "Call 911." Tank made it to the shade of a big oak tree at the edge of the parking lot, its branches throwing a wide circle of relief onto the hot pavement. He dropped to his knees, still cradling the little girl against his chest, and eased her down onto his lap, careful to keep her head propped against his arm. "There we go," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're okay now. You're okay." Her skin was still too hot, her curls stuck flat to her forehead with sweat. Her breathing came in short little gasps, but at least she was breathing steady now, not that ragged gulping sound from before. Tank reached for the water bottle clipped to his belt, twisted off the cap with one hand, and pulled the bandana from around his neck with the other. He soaked the cloth, wringing out just enough so it wouldn't drip into her eyes, and pressed it gentle against her forehead. Then her cheeks, then the back of her neck, where the heat always built up worst in little kids. "That's it," he murmured, dabbing slow circles against her skin. "That's it, sweetheart. Nice and cool. You're doing good." Her eyes fluttered up at him, still glassy, but there was something more alert in them now, something that hadn't been there in the car. Her lips trembled, and then she let out a cry, not the broken, exhausted whimper from before, but a real cry this time, loud and full of air. Tank almost smiled. A crying kid was a good sign. A crying kid had strength left in her. "I know," he said, pouring a little more water onto the bandana, and pressing it against her chest now, right over her racing heart. "I know it's scary. You cry it out. That's all right. Cry it all out." Behind him, the crowd had grown. Tank could hear them without even turning around, their voices low but not quiet enough. "Where's the mother? Who leaves a baby like that?" "That poor thing. Look how red her face is." "Somebody needs to call the cops. This is criminal." Tank kept his back to them, his focus locked on the little girl in his arms. He didn't have time or patience for people who wanted to stand around and judge instead of doing something useful. He'd seen that plenty of times in his life. People quick to point fingers, slow to actually help. It made his jaw tighten, but he didn't let it show in his voice. He didn't want the baby picking up on any of that anger. "You're safe," he told her again, softer this time. "I got you. Nobody's gonna hurt you." Her cries were softening now, the loud wails breaking down into hiccups, little shuddering breaths that came further and further apart. Her small hand, sticky with sweat, found the front of Tank's leather vest and gripped a fistful of it, holding on like it was the only solid thing in the world. Tank felt something twist hard in his chest at that. He didn't know this kid, had never seen her before in his life. But something about that little hand clutching at him, trusting him without even knowing his name, hit him somewhere deep and old. "That's right," he said, voice rough now. "You just hold on. I ain't going anywhere." That was when he heard it. A woman's voice, high and cracked with panic, cutting clean through the murmur of the crowd. "Daisy!" Tank looked up. A young woman was sprinting across the parking lot, her hair falling loose from a ponytail, a phone in one hand. Grocery bags lay forgotten behind her on the pavement, one already split open, oranges rolling across the hot asphalt. Her face was white with terror, her eyes wide and wild as they swept across the scene. The shattered car window, the crowd, the phones raised and recording. "Daisy! Oh my God, Daisy!" She was close now, close enough that Tank could see the tears already streaming down her face, could hear the broken sound of his own name for the child ripping out of her throat like it hurt to say it. And then her eyes found them. Found Tank, kneeling in the shade with her daughter cradled safe against his chest, the wet bandana still pressed to her skin. The young woman froze mid-stride, her chest heaving, her whole body going still like the ground had dropped out from under her. "Daisy." The young woman's legs gave out. She hit the pavement hard, right beside Tank, her knees scraping against the hot asphalt, but she didn't seem to notice or care. Her hands reached out, shaking, hovering over her daughter like she was scared to touch her, scared she might break something that was already broken. Oh my God, is she okay? Please tell me she's okay." "She's breathing fine," Tank said, keeping his voice low and even, the same tone he'd used on the child. "Getting some color back. She's gonna be all right." The woman let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp, and pressed her hand against her mouth like she could hold the sound in. Her whole body was shaking now. "I just went in for her prescription," she said, the words tumbling out fast, tripping over each other. "The pharmacy line, it wasn't supposed to take that long. I checked. I always check. I set a timer on my phone. I was going to be 60 seconds. I swear I was going to be 60 seconds. Ma'am, I didn't think. I never leave her. This isn't. I'm not." Her voice cracked apart completely. "I'm not a bad mom." "I know," Tank said. But she wasn't listening to him anymore. Her eyes had found the crowd, found the phones still raised, still recording, found the faces that weren't looking at her with any kindness at all. "What kind of person does that?" a woman near the front muttered, not even bothering to lower her voice. "Leaves a baby in a hot car like that." "Should be arrested," a man added. "That's neglect right there." Poor baby could have died. Each word landed on the young woman like a blow. Tank watched her flinch, watched her shoulders curl inward like she was trying to make herself smaller, trying to disappear right there on the hot pavement. Her hands were still shaking as she reached for her daughter, and this time, Tank passed the little girl into her mother's arms. Careful, gentle, watching the woman's whole body curve around the child, like she was trying to shield her from the entire world. "I'm sorry," she was whispering now, over and over, to the baby, to herself, to nobody in particular. "I'm so sorry, baby, I'm so sorry." The whispers kept coming from the crowd. Tank felt his jaw tighten, felt that old familiar heat building in his chest, the kind he used to feel back in his army days when he watched somebody get kicked while they were already down. He'd had enough. Tank rose to his feet slowly, unfolding his big frame to its full height, 6'3" of leather and muscle and faded ink, and the crowd's whispers died down just a little at the sight of him standing. He turned to face them, his back straight, his shoulders squared, planting himself like a wall between the sobbing young mother and the dozen or so strangers who thought they had any right to judge her. "Anybody here ever made a mistake?" His voice wasn't loud, but it carried deep and rough, cutting clean through the parking lot noise. Nobody answered. "Anybody here ever been so tired, so stretched thin? You forgot something for a minute? Anybody here ever had a kid, and knows what it's like to be running on no sleep and too many bills and not enough hours in the day?" Still nobody answered. A few people looked away, phones lowering slightly. "This woman," Tank said, "ran into a store for 60 seconds to get medicine for her baby. That's it. That's the whole crime. She didn't hurt anybody. She made a mistake any one of us exhausted, overwhelmed parents could make on our worst day. And she's already more scared and more sorry than anything you people could say to her right now." He looked around at the crowd, one face at a time, letting his eyes settle hard on the ones still holding up their phones. "So how about you put those away?" he said, and let her breathe. Nobody moved for a second. Then, slowly, phones started lowering. A few people shuffled back, suddenly finding something else to look at. The murmur of judgment died down into an uncomfortable silence. Tank knelt back down beside the young woman, who was staring up at him now with something like disbelief in her tear-streaked eyes. Like she couldn't quite understand why this stranger, this huge biker with the scary tattoos, had just stood up for her like that. The ambulance pulled up 2 minutes later, its lights washing red and white across the parking lot, and 2 paramedics climbed out with the kind of calm, practiced hurry that came from doing this job 1,000 times before. One of them, a woman with short gray hair and kind eyes, knelt down next to Reese and Daisy right away. "Hi there, sweetheart," she said softly to Daisy, checking her pulse, her breathing, shining a small light in her eyes. "Let's see how you're doing." Daisy whimpered but didn't fight her, too worn out from crying to do much of anything. The paramedic checked her temperature, felt along her arms, listened to her chest with a stethoscope, all while her partner set up a small oxygen mask nearby just in case. "She's dehydrated," the paramedic said after a minute, glancing up at Reese. "Her temperature's elevated, but it's coming down fast, especially thanks to whatever you did before we got here." She nodded toward Tank. "Good thinking. Cooling her off like that probably made all the difference." "She's gonna be okay?" Reese asked, her voice still trembling. "She's gonna be just fine. We'll want to get some fluids in her, maybe keep an eye on her for a bit, but kids are tough. She's a fighter." The paramedic smiled gently at Daisy, who blinked up at her with big, tired eyes. "Aren't you, sweetheart?" Reese let out a breath she must have been holding for 5 whole minutes. Her shoulders sagged with relief, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, different from before. Not fear this time. Relief. A police officer had shown up too, standing off to the side with his notepad out, and Tank watched him carefully as the man approached. He'd seen this before, seen how quick some people were to turn a scared mother into a criminal without knowing a single thing about her life. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to ask you a few questions," the officer said, not unkindly, but official all the same. "Of course," Reese said quickly, wiping at her face. "Whatever you need." Tank stepped in before the officer could get another word out. "She already told you what happened. Went in for a prescription, got held up in line, was gone less than 2 minutes. That's not a crime, that's a mistake. And she's already been through enough today." The officer looked at Tank for a long moment, taking in the leather vest, the tattoos, the sheer size of him. Then he looked at Reese, at Daisy in her arms, at the way the young mother's hands still hadn't stopped shaking. "I hear you," the officer said finally. "I just need to file a report. It's routine, ma'am, nothing more. Nobody's arresting anybody today." Reese nodded, and the officer stepped back to make his notes, giving her a little space to breathe. Tank knelt down and started gathering the groceries that had spilled from her bags, the ones she'd dropped and forgotten the second she'd seen Daisy in that car. A carton of eggs, miraculously unbroken, a loaf of bread, a small bottle of children's medicine, the very thing she'd run in for in the first place. "Here," he said, holding the bag out to her once he'd packed it all back up. "Got everything." "Thank you," Reese whispered, taking the bag with a hand that still trembled. "Thank you so much for all of it." She shifted Daisy onto one hip and reached into her purse to find her wallet, probably to show the officer her ID, and in her rush, in her exhaustion, the wallet slipped right out of her fingers and hit the pavement, its contents scattering across the hot asphalt. Cards, a few crumpled bills, a grocery store receipt. And one photograph, old and faded at the edges, sliding out and landing face up in front of Tank's boots. He bent down to pick it up, meaning to just hand it back without looking. But something caught his eye. A young man in an army uniform, grinning wide at the camera, his arms slung around another soldier's shoulders. Tank's breath caught in his throat. He knew that face. He'd know that face anywhere. "Who is this?" Tank asked, his voice suddenly rough, his eyes locked on the photograph like he'd seen a ghost. "This man in the picture. Who is he to you?" Reese blinked at him, confused by the strange, tight look on his face. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to steady herself enough to answer. "That's my dad," she said, her voice cracking. "That's Danny Calloway." Tank didn't move. He just stared at the photograph like it might vanish if he blinked. "He passed away 2 years ago," Reese went on, sniffling, bending down to pick up the rest of her scattered things with one hand while she balanced Daisy on her hip with the other. "Heart attack. Just dropped in the kitchen one morning. Mom found him." Her voice wobbled, and she paused to collect a crumpled receipt from the ground before continuing. "He didn't talk about the army much. Not ever, really. I knew he served. I knew he was proud of it in his own quiet way. But he never told stories, not like some of the other dads did. Whenever I asked, he'd just get this look on his face and change the subject." She shook her head, a small, sad smile touching her lips. "I used to think maybe it was boring to him, like it was just a job he did a long time ago and didn't think much about anymore." She looked up at Tank, noticing for the first time how still he'd gone, how his jaw was clenched tight like he was holding something back. "Why?" she asked slowly. Did you know him?" Tank didn't answer right away. He was still looking at the photograph, at the 2 young men grinning into the camera like they had the whole world in front of them, and nothing could ever touch them. He remembered that day. He remembered the heat, the dust, the sound of laughter before everything got hard. "Yeah," he finally said, his voice thick, rougher than usual. "I knew him." He looked up at Reese, and there was something raw in his eyes now, something that hadn't been there a second ago. "Danny Calloway," he said again, like saying the name out loud might make it more real. 82nd Airborne. We came up together. Same unit, same barracks, same everything for almost 4 years. He swallowed hard. He was my brother. Reese's mouth fell open slightly. Daisy shifted against her shoulder, murmuring something sleepy, but Reese barely noticed. "During a training jump," Tank continued, his eyes distant now, seeing something far away from the hot parking lot they stood in. "Things went bad. My chute didn't open right. I was spinning, hit the ground wrong, got tangled up bad. Would have died out there if your dad hadn't come running. He didn't think twice, pulled me clear, got me help, stayed with me the whole way to the hospital." He shook his head slowly, like he still couldn't believe it, even after all these years. "Man saved my life. Simple as that." Reese felt her knees go weak, and she reached out to steady herself against the side of the ambulance, still holding Daisy close. "I didn't know," she whispered. "He never said anything about that. Not once." "That was Danny," Tank said, a faint, sad smile crossing his face. "Never wanted the credit. Never wanted anybody making a fuss over him." Then his smile faded, and something darker passed over his features. Something like guilt. "We had a falling out," he admitted quietly. "Years back. Stupid thing, really. A woman, if you can believe it. Neither of us probably even remembers her name anymore, if we're being honest. But it got ugly between us, and we said things we shouldn't have. I left the service not long after, and we just lost touch. I always figured there'd be time to fix it. Always thought I'd run into him again someday, buy him a beer, laugh about how dumb we'd been. His eyes met Reese's, and there was real pain in them now, deep and old. I didn't know he passed, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have reached out years ago. I should have fixed it while I still could. Reese stood frozen, staring at this enormous, tattooed stranger who had just shattered her car window to save her daughter, and who now stood before her shaking with grief over a father she thought she'd known everything about. I can't believe this, she said softly. I can't believe you're standing here, in this parking lot, today, of all days. Tank's house was quiet the way it always was. Too quiet. He sat in his worn recliner with just one lamp on, the yellow light throwing long shadows across the living room walls. In his hands, he held a photograph so old the edges had gone soft and curled like dry leaves. Two young soldiers stood grinning at the camera. Tank barely recognized himself in that picture. 23 years old, no gray in his stubble, no lines carved deep around his eyes. Next to him stood Danny, one arm slung over Tank's shoulder, laughing at something neither of them could probably remember now. He ran his thumb over Danny's face in the photo. You should have told me you had a family, he said out loud, his voice rough in the empty room. You should have let me know. The house didn't answer him. It never did. Tank leaned back in the chair, letting his head rest against the cushion, staring up at the ceiling like the answers might be written there. His knee ached the way it always did when the weather changed, an old reminder of the jump that nearly killed him. Danny had carried him off that field. Danny had held his hand in the helicopter and told him he wasn't allowed to die, not on his watch. And Tank had let a stupid argument, a woman whose face he couldn't even picture anymore, come between them. He'd let pride keep him from picking up a phone for years. Now Danny was gone, buried in the ground, and there was no fixing it, no beer to share, no laughing about how dumb they'd been. But there was Reese. There was Daisy. Tank sat up straight, setting the photograph down gently on the side table like it was something fragile that might break if he wasn't careful. Maybe this was his chance. Maybe fate, or God, or whatever you wanted to call it, had put him in that parking lot for a reason. He hadn't just saved a stranger's kid. He'd saved Danny's granddaughter. He'd found Danny's daughter, drowning and too proud to ask for a hand up. Tank didn't believe in a lot of things. He didn't believe in luck, and he sure didn't believe in coincidence. But he believed in debts, and he owed Danny Calloway a debt that could never really be paid back, not fully. Still, he could try. He could show up. He could make sure Danny's girls never had to face hard times alone. He made up his mind right there in that quiet living room. Tomorrow, he'd go check on them. The next morning came bright and hot, the kind of July sun that made the pavement shimmer. Tank pulled his Harley into the parking lot of Reese's apartment complex, a tired-looking building with peeling paint and a parking lot full of cracks. He cut the engine and sat there a moment, feeling strange nerves he hadn't felt in years. He climbed the metal stairs to the second floor and knocked on her door. It took a while before Reese answered. When she did, she looked worn thin, dark circles under her eyes, her hair pulled back in a messy knot. She was still wearing yesterday's clothes, and Daisy's cries could be heard faintly from somewhere behind her. "Tank," she said, surprise flickering across her face before it hardened into something guarded. "What are you doing here?" "Wanted to check on you two," he said, keeping his voice easy, gentle. "See how you're holding up." Reese crossed her arms over her chest, leaning against the doorframe like it might hold her up. "We're fine," she said. Her tone was flat, final. "You don't have to keep doing this." "Doing what?" This. She gestured vaguely between them. Showing up, checking on us. I appreciate what you did yesterday, I really do. But I don't need charity, Tank. And I definitely don't need pity because you feel guilty about some falling out with my dad 20 years ago. Tank held up his hands, palms out. That's not what this is. Isn't it? Her eyes were sharp now, tired but fierce. I've been taking care of Daisy on my own for 2 years. I don't need someone swooping in on a motorcycle to save the day. She straightened up, jaw tight. We're fine, she said again, quieter this time, like she was trying to convince herself as much as him. Please, just let us be. Tank didn't argue with her that day. He just nodded, climbed back on his Harley, and rode off like she'd asked. But he came back the next morning. Reese's old sedan sat in the same spot it always did, nose pointed toward the dumpster, one tire looking flatter than the others. Tank parked his bike 2 spots down and walked over like he owned the place, carrying a toolbox that had seen 40 years of use. He popped the hood without knocking on anybody's door, without asking permission. The engine sputtered and coughed when he checked it, sounding worse than he expected. Belts were cracked. The battery corroded around the terminals like old rust flowers. He shook his head, muttering to himself, and got to work. Up on the 2nd floor, behind a window with a crack running through the corner, Daisy pressed her small hands against the glass. She'd woken up from her nap and wandered to the window like she always did, watching the parking lot the way some kids watched cartoons. But this morning there was a giant of a man crouched over her mama's car, his big arms covered in ink, moving with the kind of careful patience most people wouldn't expect from someone his size. She giggled, pointing. "Mama, big man!" Reese came to the window, coffee mug in hand, and felt her stomach twist when she saw him. "He's not supposed to be here," she muttered, though she didn't move to stop him. She just stood there, watching Tank work, feeling something complicated stirring in her chest. Anger, frustration. And underneath all of that, something warmer she didn't want to name. He worked through the morning heat without a single complaint. Sweat soaked through his shirt, dripped down his temples, but he kept at it, checking belts, testing the battery, tightening things that had been loose for months. Every now and then he'd glance up toward the window, catch Daisy's eyes peeking over the sill, and give her a small wave. She'd duck away giggling every time, only to pop back up seconds later. By noon, Reese couldn't take it anymore. She stood on her balcony, arms crossed, watching him wipe grease off his hands with a rag from his back pocket. "You're going to give yourself heat stroke," she called down. Tank looked up, squinting against the sun. "Wouldn't be the first time." She almost smiled. Almost. A little while later, she came down the metal stairs carrying a tall glass of lemonade, the ice already starting to melt in the heat. She held it out to him without quite meeting his eyes. "Figured you could use this," she said, "since you're not going to listen when I tell you to stop." Tank took the glass, drank half of it in one go, and let out a breath. "Thanks." They stood there a moment, awkward silence stretching between them, filled only by the sound of cicadas buzzing in the bushes nearby. "You didn't have to do this," Reese said finally, her voice softer now, some of the sharp edges worn down by exhaustion and the heat. "I know," Tank said simply. She looked at the car, at the new belt he'd installed, the battery he'd cleaned and tightened. "How much do I owe you?" "Nothing." He said it like it was obvious, like the question itself didn't make sense to him. Reese was quiet for a long moment, staring at her shoes, arms wrapped around herself even in the heat. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, gotten smaller somehow. "My husband used to fix things," she said. "Before he died. He was good with cars, good with his hands. Daisy was only 4 months old when the accident happened. She swallowed hard. It's just been me since then. No family close by. My mom passed when I was in high school, and Dad— She trailed off, shaking her head. It's just been me and Daisy. That's it. No safety net. No backup plan. Tank stayed quiet, letting her talk, not pushing, not offering pity, just standing there with the lemonade sweating in his hand. I don't say that for sympathy, Reese added quickly, like she regretted admitting it already. I wanted you to understand why I get so defensive. It's not you. It's just easier to keep people out. The diner sat on the corner of 5th and Main, a squat little building with a neon sign that buzzed and flickered and spelled out EIT in faded red letters. Tank had been coming here since before half the waitresses were born. The booths were cracked vinyl, patched with silver tape, and the coffee tasted burnt no matter what time of day you ordered it. But the pancakes were good, and the woman who ran the place, Marge, kept a booster seat behind the counter just for kids like Daisy. Tank held the door open, his big frame blocking out the afternoon sun. Reese walked in first, holding Daisy's hand, looking a little unsure, like she wasn't quite certain why she'd said yes to this. You said you had stories, she reminded him as they slid into a booth by the window. I got plenty, Tank said, easing his large body onto the bench across from her. He waved down Marge, who brought over the booster seat without being asked, and winked at Daisy, who giggled and reached for the crayons on the table. They ordered. Grilled cheese for Daisy, a burger for Reese, and Tank got his usual eggs and toast, no matter what time of day it was. While they waited, Tank leaned back, arms crossed over his chest, and let the memory settle in before he spoke. Your dad, he started, was the funniest guy in our whole unit. I mean it. Guys would be miserable, exhausted, marching for hours in the heat, and Danny would find some way to make everybody laugh. He had this bit he used to do, an impression of our drill sergeant. Man, it was spot on. Voice, the walk, everything. Got him in trouble more than once. Reese blinked, surprised. My dad? Doing impressions? Swear it, Tank said, holding up a hand like he was testifying in court. One time our sergeant caught him doing it right behind his back. Whole platoon froze. Thought Danny was done for. But the sergeant just stood there, stone-faced, and said, Do it again, Calloway, but get my nose right this time. Reese laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her like it had been hiding somewhere, and finally found a crack to escape through. Daisy looked up at the sound, grinning without knowing why, then went back to scribbling on her paper placemat. He never told me any of this, Reese said, shaking her head slowly. I mean, I knew he was in the army. I knew he was proud of it, but he never talked about what it was actually like. Not really. Some guys don't, Tank said. Some stuff you carry different. But your dad, he wasn't just funny. He was brave, too. There was this one time during a training jump my chute didn't deploy right. Tangled up bad. I was spinning, panicking, losing altitude fast. He paused, his voice dropping lower, more careful. Danny was above me, saw what was happening. He did something reckless, something they don't teach you, to get close enough to help me sort it out mid-air. Could have killed us both. Instead, we walked away. Reese's eyes had gone wide, glassy, with unshed tears. He never told me that story. Wasn't the kind of thing he bragged about, Tank said. That was just Danny. Do the hard thing, then never mention it again. The food came. Daisy ate half her sandwich and gave the rest to the ketchup bottle, smearing it across the table with the kind of joy only a toddler could find in condiments. Reese barely touched her burger, too caught up listening to Tank talk, asking questions now, wanting more. I always felt like I barely knew him, she admitted quietly. Once the stories had slowed and the diner had grown quiet around them, the dinner rush not yet arrived. Like there was this whole part of his life that was locked away somewhere I couldn't reach. Tank nodded slowly. I got more where that came from. Whenever you want to hear it. By the time they were ready to leave, the sun had dipped low, painting the sky in soft orange and pink. Daisy had gone quiet in her booster seat, her head tilted to the side, eyes closed, sound asleep with ketchup still on her cheek. Tank stood, tossing bills on the table for Marge. Let me walk you two home. The clubhouse sat at the edge of town, a long building made of cinder block and corrugated metal, with motorcycles lined up out front like horses at a hitching post. Tank pulled his truck into the gravel lot, Reese's car following close behind, and killed the engine. His hands stayed on the wheel a second longer than they needed to. You okay? Reese asked from the passenger seat, Daisy already awake and craning her neck to look out the window at the rows of chrome and leather. Yeah, Tank said, though his jaw was tight. Just been a while since I brought somebody who wasn't Club. Reese raised an eyebrow. You nervous, Tank? He almost laughed at that, the idea of it. A man his size, covered in ink, built like a door frame, nervous about a bunch of his own friends. But there it was, sitting heavy in his chest. These men were his brothers. They'd been through things together that most people couldn't understand. He didn't know how they'd act with a woman and a little girl underfoot, especially one that mattered to him the way Reese and Daisy had started to matter. Come on, he said, opening his door. Let's just see. The front door of the clubhouse swung open before they even reached it, and out stepped a mountain of a man with a beard down to his chest and arms like tree trunks. Diesel. His leather vest was covered in patches, faded from years of sun and rain, and his eyes crinkled the second he spotted Daisy peeking out from behind Reese's leg. Well, would you look at this? Diesel boomed, his voice rolling out across the lot like thunder. Tank Morrison brought guests. Somebody alert the media. Tank rolled his eyes, but the tightness in his shoulders eased a little. Diesel, this is Reese, and that's Daisy hiding behind her. Diesel crouched down, slow and easy, making himself smaller, less like a mountain and more like a big friendly dog. Hey there, little miss. You like motorcycles? Daisy peeked out further, thumb in her mouth, studying him with the serious focus only a toddler could manage. She loves them, Reese said, a nervous laugh slipping out. Cries every time one drives past without her. Well then, Diesel said, standing back up with a grin. You've come to the right place. Inside, the clubhouse was nothing like Reese expected. She'd pictured something dark and dangerous, maybe smoky, full of hard stairs. Instead, there were string lights hung along the ceiling, a pool table in the corner, and the smell of barbecue drifting in from somewhere out back. A few men sat around a table playing cards, and they looked up when Tank walked in, nodding at him with easy familiarity before their eyes landed on Reese and Daisy. One of them, tall and lanky with silver hoop earrings and a gap-toothed grin, stood up immediately. This was Preacher. He crossed the room in a few long strides and dropped down onto one knee in front of Daisy, bringing himself level with her. Well, hello there, Princess, he said, his voice gentle, nothing like the gruff bark Reese had expected. You want to see something cool? Daisy looked up at her mother, silently asking permission. Reese, still a little stunned by how easily these enormous, tattooed men had shifted into softness, nodded. Preacher led them outside to where his motorcycle sat gleaming in the afternoon sun, chrome polished so bright it nearly hurt to look at. He settled onto the seat, then reached down and lifted Daisy up, setting her carefully in his lap, one big hand steady against her middle so she wouldn't slip. "Right there," he said, pointing to the horn button. "Give it a honk." Daisy pressed down with both hands, and the horn blared out loud across the lot. She jumped, startled, then burst into a fit of giggles, pressing it again and again, delighted with the noise she'd made. Preacher laughed along with her, steady and warm, his big frame curled protectively around her small one, like a wall keeping the whole world out. Reese stood off to the side, arms wrapped around herself, watching. Her eyes had gone glassy again, the same way they had at the diner, but this time there was something different in her face. Something softening. Tank came up beside her, quiet, giving her space. "They don't look so scary now, do they?" he said. Reese shook her head slowly, watching Daisy's laughter ring out across the lot, watching Preacher's careful hands, watching a community she never expected to find, wrapping itself gently around her daughter. "No," she said softly. "They really don't." 3 weeks slipped by, and Tank started to notice things. Small things, at first. Reese's laugh came a little slower now, like it took more effort to find. Her jeans, the ones she'd worn to the barbecue at the clubhouse, hung looser around her hips. When he stopped by the diner one afternoon to fix a leak under her kitchen sink, he found her leaning against the counter during a lull, eyes closed, looking like she might fall asleep standing up. "Reese," he said, setting down his toolbox. "You eating?" Her eyes snapped open. "Course I am," she said, straightening up fast, plastering on a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just tired. Daisy had a rough night." Tank didn't push. Not that day. But he kept watching. He noticed the dark circles under her eyes getting darker. He noticed how she'd order coffee and nothing else when they grabbed lunch together, saying she'd already eaten or wasn't hungry, or was trying to save room for dinner later. He noticed her picking at Daisy's leftover crusts instead of ordering her own sandwich, calling it a habit, calling it nothing. At the diner, her manager mentioned offhand that Reese had picked up 2 more double shifts that week, on top of the ones she already worked. "Girl's a machine," the manager said, shaking her head. "Don't know how she does it?" Tank knew how she did it. She did it because she was scared, and proud, and too stubborn to ask for help even when she was drowning. He'd seen that kind of pride before, in soldiers who wouldn't admit they were hurt until they collapsed. Danny had been like that too, once, tough as nails and twice as stubborn. "You look tired," Tank told her one evening, when he'd stopped by to drop off a bag of groceries he claimed the club had extra of, which was a lie, but a kind one. Reese stood in her doorway, Daisy asleep on her hip, and even in the porch light he could see how pale she was. "I'm fine, Tank," she said, the words coming out clipped, tired. "I appreciate you checking on us, I really do. But I've got this handled." "Nobody said you didn't." "You've got that look," she said. "Like you're about to offer me money or a place to stay or something. I don't need charity." "Wasn't gonna offer that," Tank said, though it had crossed his mind more than once. "Just worried about you, that's all. Friends worry." Reese's shoulders sagged, just slightly, the fight going out of her for a second. "I know," she said softer now. "I know you mean well. I got it. Okay? I promise." He wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that promises didn't mean much when a person looked like they were running on empty, when their smile looked more like a mask than anything real. But he saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the plea buried underneath the pride, and he let it go. For now. "All right," he said, You need anything, you call me. I will, she said, though they both knew she wouldn't. That night, after Tank's truck had pulled away, and Daisy was finally asleep in her crib, breathing soft and even, Reese sat down at her kitchen table. She pulled a shoebox from the cabinet above the fridge, the one where she kept everything she didn't want to look at during the day, and dumped its contents onto the table. Bills, stacks of them. Electric, water, the payment plan for Daisy's daycare that she was already behind on. And on top, folded crisp and official, was the letter that had come that morning. Final notice. 30 days to pay what she owed in back rent or vacate the premises. She stared at the number at the bottom of the page until it blurred. Her hands shook as she gathered the papers back into a neat pile, squaring the edges like that might fix something. She thought of Tank's face on the porch, the way his eyes had searched hers, looking for the truth she was hiding. She couldn't tell him. Couldn't tell any of them. Not Preacher, who'd been teaching Daisy to say, vroom, vroom. Not Diesel, who'd hugged her like family at the barbecue. And especially not Tank, who already carried so much weight for a debt he thought he owed her father. She wouldn't be one more burden. Wouldn't be pity dressed up as friendship. Reese pressed her palms against her eyes, and in the quiet of her kitchen, with only the hum of the refrigerator for company, she let herself cry. Silent, careful tears, the kind that wouldn't wake a sleeping child down the hall. Tomorrow, she decided, she would smile again. She would say she was fine. The daycare's fence had been leaning for months, one bad storm away from falling over completely. Reese had put in 3 requests to the landlord, all ignored. On a Tuesday morning, she pulled up to drop off Daisy and found Preacher already there, sleeves rolled up, a toolbox at his feet. "Morning," he said, like it was the most normal thing in the world for a 250-pound biker with a beard down to his chest to be hammering nails into a preschool fence. "Preacher, you don't have to—" "Already started," he said, not looking up. "Can't exactly stop now. Wood's already cut." Daisy toddled over, fascinated by the toolbox, and Preacher crouched down to show her the hammer, letting her hold it with both hands, guiding her grip so she wouldn't drop it on her toes. "That's a girl," he said. "You're a natural." Reese stood there, unsure what to say, watching this mountain of a man treat her daughter like she was made of something precious. Later that week, Diesel's wife, a round-faced woman named Connie with kind eyes and flour permanently dusted on her apron, showed up at Reese's door holding a casserole dish covered in foil. "Made too much again?" Connie said, pushing past Reese's protest before she could even form the words. "Diesel and I can't eat all this ourselves. You'd be doing me a favor, taking it off my hands." "Connie, I can't keep—" "Nonsense," Connie said, already setting the dish on the counter. "It's just food, honey. Nothing to make a fuss over." Her eyes flicked to the thin line of Reese's collarbone, visible above her shirt collar, but she said nothing about it. Just squeezed Reese's hand and left before Reese could think of a way to refuse. Reese ate the casserole that night, and for once, she didn't feel guilty about it. She told herself it was just food, nothing to make a fuss over. Tank came by most evenings after his shift at the garage, parking his Harley in the same spot in front of Reese's building, the engine growling low before it went quiet. Daisy had taken to running to the window the second she heard it, pressing her small hands against the glass, bouncing on her toes. "Vroom, vroom," Tank said one evening, crouching down so he was eye level with her, pointing at the bike gleaming in the fading light. "Can you say it? Vroom, vroom?" Daisy scrunched up her face in concentration. "Boom, boom," she said, and dissolved into giggles at her own attempt. "Close enough," Tank said, grinning, the expression transforming his whole face, softening the hard lines around his eyes. He never took her near the bike itself, always kept a careful distance, mindful of hot metal and moving parts, but he let her admire it from the porch steps, let her point and squeal and clap her hands every time he revved the engine just a little, just enough to make her jump and laugh. The neighbors noticed. Mrs. Patterson from 2 doors down, who used to grip her purse a little tighter whenever Tank walked by, started waving at him from her porch. "Evening, Tank," she'd call, and he'd nod back, tipping an imaginary hat. The mailman commented on it, too, mentioned to Reese one afternoon that he'd never seen so many motorcycles parked outside a building without something bad happening. "Good bunch of guys," he said, sorting through his bag. "Didn't expect that." Reese found herself smiling more, even as the shoebox of bills sat untouched in her cabinet, even as the eviction notice grew heavier in her mind with each passing day. She hadn't told any of them, hadn't found the words or the courage, or maybe just hadn't wanted to shatter the fragile good thing that had built itself around her and Daisy, without her even trying. That evening, sitting on the porch steps while Tank revved his engine one more time for Daisy's delight, Reese let herself laugh, really laugh, the sound bubbling up from somewhere she'd thought had gone dry. Daisy shrieked with joy, running in circles, chanting, "Boom, boom," over and over, and for just a moment, watching her daughter's pure, uncomplicated happiness, Reese forgot about the letter in the shoebox, forgot about the numbers that didn't add up, forgot about everything except the warm evening air and the sound of her daughter's laughter ringing out across the yard. The clubhouse sat at the end of a gravel road, a long metal building that used to be a warehouse before the club bought it and made it their own. Inside, the walls were covered in old photographs, road maps, and a few faded flags from rides taken years ago. The smell of motor oil and coffee hung in the air, familiar as an old friend. Tank found Diesel and Preacher in the back office, the one with the cracked leather couch and the desk covered in invoices nobody ever seemed to file. Diesel looked up from a stack of papers, reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, looking nothing like the man most people crossed the street to avoid. "You got that look," Diesel said, setting down his pen. "What look?" Tank asked, though he already knew. "The one you get when something's eating at you." Diesel leaned back in his chair, the wood groaning under his weight. "Sit down, Tank. Talk." Tank pulled up a folding chair, the metal legs scraping against the concrete floor. Preacher, who'd been leaning against the doorframe with a toothpick in his mouth, pushed off and came to sit on the arm of the couch, giving Tank his full attention. "It's Reese," Tank said. "Something's wrong. I can feel it." "She say something?" Preacher asked. "No, that's the problem." Tank rubbed a hand over his stubbled jaw, the gesture tired, worn down. "She smiles. She laughs. Daisy's happy. But there's this look Reese gets sometimes when she thinks nobody's watching, like she's doing math in her head she doesn't want to be doing." Diesel was quiet for a moment, studying Tank's face. "You think it's money?" "I know it's money," Tank said. "Woman's working 2 jobs and still looks like she hasn't eaten a full meal in weeks. I've seen it before, back in the service. That look. Guys who'd give you their whole ration and swear up and down they weren't hungry." Preacher nodded slowly, the toothpick shifting from one side of his mouth to the other. "Pride's a heavy thing to carry." "Heavier than most people know," Tank agreed. "And she won't take help. Not straight up, anyway. You offer her cash, she'll look at you like you slapped her." Diesel took off his reading glasses, folding them and setting them on the desk. "So what's the play?" Tank had been turning it over in his head for days, ever since he'd noticed the way Reese flinched at the price of gas, the way she'd started declining coffee when they all went out, saying she wasn't thirsty. Daisy's birthday is coming up. 3rd birthday. Kid's turning 3, Preacher said, a slow grin spreading across his face. That's a big deal. It could be, Tank said. If we threw her a party, right here. Full spread, bounce house, the works. Make it feel like a celebration, not a handout. Diesel was already nodding, understanding blooming in his eyes. And while everybody's celebrating, we pass a hat. Quiet-like. Nobody makes a big show of it. Exactly, Tank said, leaning forward, feeling something like hope stir in his chest for the first time in weeks. She'd never accept money if we handed it to her outright. But if it's a gift for Daisy from people who love her, she can't say no to that, Preacher finished, slapping his knee. Man, that's good. That's real good. We'll need Connie, Diesel said, already reaching for a scrap of paper, scribbling notes. She's got a way of getting people to give without making them feel like they're being asked. And I'll get the boys to chip in for a bounce house. Might know a guy who can get us one cheap. I'll handle the grill, Preacher said. Burgers, hot dogs, maybe get Big Mike to bring his sound system. We can have music. Tank felt something loosen in his chest, a knot he hadn't realized had been sitting there for days. Watching Diesel and Preacher toss ideas back and forth, already turning his half-formed plan into something real, something bigger than he'd imagined, he let himself believe, just for a moment, that things were going to be okay. He stood, clapping Diesel on the shoulder. Thanks, brother. Don't thank us yet, Diesel said, grinning. We haven't even started. Tank walked out into the evening air feeling lighter than he had in weeks, already picturing Reese's face when she saw what they'd built for her daughter. The clubhouse turned into a different place over the next several days. Streamers in blue and yellow got strung across the rafters, twisted up by Preacher and a club member named Snake, who kept falling off the ladder and blaming the ladder instead of himself. Connie, Diesel's wife, showed up with a clipboard and a mission, moving through the building like a small general, pointing at things and making them happen. Tables got set up. A banner went across the front wall that said, "Happy Birthday, Daisy," in big block letters, painted by hand, because nobody could find a printer that would rush the order in time. The guest list grew every day. Connie called people Tank didn't even know the club was connected to. The daycare workers. A woman from the pharmacy who'd always been kind to Reese. Neighbors from Reese's apartment building. Even the mailman, who Connie swore had a soft spot for Daisy because she waved at him every single day without fail. You're turning this into a whole town event, Tank said one afternoon, watching Connie tape a sign to the door that read, "Parking this way," with an arrow. That's the idea, Connie said without looking up. The bigger the crowd, the easier it is to pass a hat without anybody noticing what's really going on. Tank had to admit, she knew what she was doing. He'd never seen anything like it. This quiet machine of kindness humming along behind the scenes, all of it built to look like nothing more than a birthday party for a 3-year-old girl. But while the clubhouse buzzed with color and noise and the smell of fresh paint, Reese sat in her small apartment each night with a different kind of buzzing in her chest. It wasn't excitement. It was fear, low and constant, like a fridge humming in another room that you only notice when everything else goes quiet. The rent was due in 6 days. She was short, not a little short. Badly short. She'd picked up every extra shift the diner would give her, but the math still didn't work. No matter how many times she ran the numbers in her head while she scrubbed dishes or wiped down tables. Daisy's birthday was coming, and Reese wanted so badly to give her something. A cake, a few presents, something to make the day feel special, even if everything else in their life felt like it was hanging by a thread. She hadn't told Tank. She hadn't told anyone. Every time he asked how she was doing, she smiled and said fine, and the word tasted like a lie every single time she said it. She hated lying to him. But telling him the truth felt like admitting she couldn't do this, couldn't take care of her own daughter, and that was a door she wasn't ready to open. Not for him, not for herself. The night before the party, Reese sat at her kitchen table with a stack of bills spread out in front of her like a losing hand of cards. The overhead light buzzed faintly, one of the bulbs starting to go. Daisy was asleep in the next room, her breathing soft and even through the cracked door. Reese had checked on her twice already, just to feel that steady rhythm settle something in her chest. She picked up a pen and a piece of paper and started doing the math again, though she already knew the answer wouldn't change. Rent, utilities. The last of her paycheck, already spent on groceries and a second-hand tricycle wrapped in the closet for tomorrow. She wrote numbers down, crossed them out, wrote new ones. Nothing added up. It never did anymore. Her hands trembled as she set the pen down. She pressed her palms flat against the table, trying to steady herself, trying to breathe past the tightness in her throat. She thought about calling Tank. Just for a second, the thought flickered through her mind, warm and tempting, but she pushed it away just as quickly. He'd already done so much. She wouldn't let herself become one more thing he had to fix. Tomorrow, she decided, she would call her landlord. She would ask for a few more days, maybe a week. She would swallow her pride enough to beg, but not enough to tell Tank the truth. That line, she promised herself, she would not cross. She turned off the kitchen light and sat there a while longer in the dark, listening to her daughter breathe, trying to convince herself that everything was going to be okay. The parking lot outside the clubhouse had never seen anything like it. Motorcycles were pushed to one side, chrome gleaming in the July sun, to make room for a giant rainbow-colored bounce house that Snake had wrestled into place that morning, cursing at the air pump the whole time. Now it bounced with the weight of a dozen kids, their laughter spilling out into the warm afternoon air. Diesel stood at the grill wearing an apron that said, "Kiss the cook" over his leather vest, flipping burgers with a spatula in one hand and a can of soda in the other. Sweat beaded on his bald head, but he didn't seem to mind, calling out orders to Preacher like a general running a very small, very greasy army. "2 more with cheese!" Diesel shouted. "And somebody get more napkins before Snake ruins another tablecloth." Streamers rippled from the rafters overhead, blue and yellow catching the breeze from the open garage doors. The banner Connie had painted hung proud above it all. "Happy Birthday, Daisy." The letters were a little crooked, but nobody noticed. Nobody cared. Daisy sat at the center of it, perched on a booster seat at the head of a long table covered in balloons and paper plates. Her curls bounced with every giggle, and her face was already smeared with frosting even though the cake hadn't officially started. 3 candles flickered in front of her, the flames dancing gently in the breeze. "Blow, baby, blow," Reese said, kneeling beside her daughter, phone camera raised, tears already gathering at the corners of her eyes, though she was smiling wide enough to hurt. Daisy scrunched up her face, took a breath big enough for a girl twice her size, and blew. 2 candles went out right away. The third flickered, stubborn, and the whole crowd around the table leaned in, cheering her on until it finally gave up and died with a thin curl of smoke. The clubhouse erupted in applause. Bikers who looked like they belonged on wanted posters clapped their big calloused hands together, whistling and hollering like Daisy had just won an Olympic medal. Preacher wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand, mumbling something about smoke getting in them, though everyone knew better. Tank stood near the edge of it all, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, watching the whole scene unfold. He didn't need to be in the middle of it. He liked watching from here, where he could see everything at once. The kids from Daisy's daycare running wild through the yard, the neighbors from Reese's building laughing with Connie like old friends. The mailman, out of uniform for the day, holding a paper plate piled high with potato salad. All of it moving and blending together into something that didn't look like it should work. But did. He thought about Danny. He couldn't help it. It was moments like this, full and loud and good, that made him feel his old friend close by, the way a certain smell can bring back a memory sharper than any photograph. Danny would have loved this. He would have been the one manning the grill, arguing with Diesel about how long to cook a burger, laughing too loud at his own jokes. Tank could almost hear him. Almost. "You did good," Preacher said, coming to stand beside him, holding 2 paper cups of lemonade. He handed one to Tank without being asked. "Wasn't just me," Tank said, taking the cup. "No," Preacher agreed, looking out at the crowd. "But it started with you." Tank didn't answer. He didn't need to. He took a sip of the lemonade, too sweet, the way Connie always made it, and let the moment settle into his chest like something solid and warm. Reese appeared beside him a few minutes later, her eyes still glassy, her cheeks flushed from laughing and crying all at once. She didn't say anything right away. She just looked out at the party, at her daughter now covered in cake, surrounded by people who 3 months ago had been strangers. Then she turned and wrapped her arms around Tank, pulling him into a hug so tight it nearly knocked the air out of him. He stood there a moment, surprised, before he let his arms come up around her, careful, like she was something fragile, even though he knew by now she wasn't. "Thank you," Reese whispered against his shoulder, her voice thick. "This is the happiest I've felt in years." The morning after the party, the world still smelled like frosting and sunshine. Reese carried a sleepy Daisy up the stairs to their apartment, her arms full of leftover paper plates and a half-deflated balloon that Daisy refused to let go of, even in sleep. Her feet ached. Her heart still felt full from the day before, warm in a way she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. Then she saw the paper taped to her door. It was bright orange, folded once, the kind of color that was meant to catch your eye and make your stomach drop at the same time. She almost walked past it, thinking it was another flyer for a lost cat or a church bake sale. But her name was printed across the top in bold black letters. Reese Calloway. She shifted Daisy onto her hip and pulled the paper down with shaking fingers. Final notice to vacate. Her eyes moved fast over the words, hoping she was reading it wrong. But there it was, plain and simple. Due to a processing error in her last payment, the timeline had moved up. She had 5 days, not 30, not 2 weeks, 5 days to pack up everything she owned and get out. The balloon slipped from Daisy's hand and drifted down the stairwell behind them. Forgotten. "No," Reese whispered, reading it again. No, this isn't right." She fumbled for her phone, still holding Daisy, who had woken up now and was starting to fuss at the sudden tightness in her mother's arms. Reese called the landlord's office. But it was Sunday, and nobody answered. She called the number listed on the notice, and it just directed her to leave a message. She sat down right there on the top step, the orange paper crumpled in her fist, and let herself cry for the first time in what felt like months. Everything had felt so good yesterday. The bounce house, the cake, the people who showed up just because they cared. And now, this. Like the universe had been waiting for her to feel safe again, just so it could pull the rug out one more time. She thought about calling her boss to ask for extra shifts. She thought about her savings, thin as they were, and how they wouldn't cover a deposit on a new place, not with 5 days' notice. She thought about shelters, about friends she could ask, about anything, and came up empty every time. Daisy patted her mother's cheek with a small, sticky hand. "Mama sad?" Reese wiped her face and forced a smile. "Mama's okay, baby." She wasn't okay, but she picked up her phone anyway, her thumb hovering over Tank's name in her contacts. She almost put the phone away. She had promised herself she wouldn't lean on him more than she already had. But the fear was bigger than her pride in that moment, and before she could stop herself, she was dialing. Tank picked up on the second ring. "Reese?" "I got an eviction notice," she said, voice cracking. 5 days, Tank. 5 days and we're out." "I'm coming over," he said, no hesitation. He was there in 20 minutes, his bike rumbling into the parking lot outside her building. She met him on the steps, Daisy on her hip, the orange paper still crumpled in her hand. He took one look at her face and didn't say a word, just reached for the notice, reading it fast. "This is a mistake," he said. "A clerical thing. We can fix this." "We," Reese said, and something in her voice sharpened. Tank looked up from the paper. "Reese, let me help. I know people. I can make some calls. I can—" "Stop." The word came out harder than she meant it to. "Just stop, Tank." He blinked at her, confused. "I'm trying to help you." "You're trying to fix me," she snapped, tears spilling over now, hot and furious. "Just like you fix everything else. My car, the fence, my whole life. Do you know how that feels? Like I'm some charity case you found in a parking lot?" "That's not what this is," Tank said quietly. "Isn't it?" Her voice cracked. "You're not my father, Tank. Daisy already lost the chance to know him. She doesn't need you trying to be him." The words landed like a slap. Tank's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. "I need you to leave," Reese said, quieter now, but no less firm. "Please." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once, his face unreadable. He walked back to his bike without another word, swung his leg over, and pulled away. Reese stood on the steps, watching until the sound of his engine faded completely, the orange paper still crumpled in her hand. The clubhouse was quiet that evening, quieter than Tank could remember it being in a long time. The neon beer sign in the window buzzed low. Somewhere in the back, a pool ball clicked against another, but even that sound felt far away. Tank sat at the long wooden bar, a bottle of beer in front of him that he hadn't touched in almost an hour. The label was peeling where his thumbnail had been picking at it, over and over, without him even noticing. He kept hearing her voice. "You're not my father, Tank." The words sat in his chest like a stone. He turned them over and over, looking for a way to make them hurt less. But they never did. Preacher pulled up a stool beside him, setting down 2 fresh beers, even though Tank's first one was still full. "You gonna drink that, or just stare it to death?" Tank didn't answer. Preacher sighed and leaned an elbow on the bar. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders, with a graying beard and kind eyes that didn't match the skull patch on his vest. He'd known Tank for almost 15 years, long enough to know when something was really wrong. "She say something to you?" Preacher asked. "She told me to leave," Tank said. His voice was flat, tired. "Said I was trying to fix her, trying to be something I'm not." "And what's that?" "Her father." Tank finally looked up. "She thinks I'm trying to replace Danny." Preacher was quiet for a moment. Across the room, Diesel had heard enough of the conversation to walk over, dragging a chair from a nearby table and turning it backward before he sat, arms crossed over the top of it. "She's scared," Diesel said simply. "People say all kinds of things when they're scared, brother. Doesn't mean they're true." "Maybe it is true," Tank said. "Maybe I've been pushing too hard. Maybe I made her feel like she couldn't stand on her own." "Or maybe," Preacher said, "you made her feel like she didn't have to stand alone? Those aren't the same thing, Tank. Tank shook his head, staring down at the bar. I just keep thinking about Danny. About that stupid fight we had right before he passed. All those years we didn't talk. And now here I am, doing the same thing with his daughter, pushing away the people who need me most. You're not pushing her away, Diesel said. She pushed you. There's a difference. Feels the same from where I'm sitting. Diesel leaned forward, his voice low and steady. Let me tell you something about family, Tank. Real family. The kind you choose and the kind that chooses you back. It doesn't fall apart because of one hard conversation. Doesn't fall apart because somebody said something ugly when they were scared and hurting. Family sticks, family waits. She needs space, Preacher added. That's all this is. Give her that, and she'll come around. You'll see. Tank didn't say anything. He picked up the beer bottle finally, took a long drink, and set it back down. I keep thinking I owe him, Tank said quietly. Danny, I keep thinking if I don't fix this, if I don't take care of them, then all of it, everything between us, it was for nothing. You don't owe him fixing her problems, Diesel said. You owe him showing up. That's it. That's all any of us can do. Tank sat with that for a long moment, the noise of the pool table clicking behind him, the buzz of the neon sign, the low hum of brothers who had seen him through worse nights than this one. Finally he nodded, more to himself than to them. I'll give her space, he said. Long as she needs. Preacher clapped him once on the shoulder, and Diesel nodded, satisfied, before pushing back up from his chair to head toward the grill out back, where somebody had started cooking late. Tank sat a while longer, finishing the beer slowly, letting the noise of the clubhouse wash over him. When he finally rode home, the night was cool and dark, stars scattered thin over the highway. His apartment was small and quiet, same as always, but tonight it felt emptier than it had in years. He sat down at his kitchen table and pulled open the drawer where he kept the old photograph, the one of him and Danny, young and grinning, arms slung over each other's shoulders in their fatigues. He stared at it a long time, Danny's easy smile looking back at him. Did I fail you? Tank whispered to the empty room. After everything, did I still let you down? The photograph didn't answer. It never did. 2 days later, the apartment looked like a life falling apart in cardboard boxes. Reese stood in the middle of her living room, surrounded by half-filled boxes, tape gun in one hand, a roll of bubble wrap hanging from her wrist. The eviction notice sat on the kitchen counter where she'd left it, the number 5 circled in red pen. 5 days. Now 3. Daisy was down for her nap, worn out from a morning of Reese trying to keep things normal, trying to make packing feel like a game instead of what it really was, losing the only home her daughter had ever known. She moved through the apartment on autopilot, wrapping plates in newspaper, folding towels into neat squares, refusing to let herself cry until the boxes were done. Crying wouldn't pack anything. Crying wouldn't pay anything either. She reached the hall closet last, the one she'd been avoiding. It was small and cramped, filled with things she never used but couldn't bring herself to throw away. Winter coats, an old vacuum, and near the back, tucked behind a stack of photo albums, a plain cardboard box with her father's name written on the side in faded marker. Danny's things. She hadn't opened it since the funeral. Back then, her hands had been shaking too hard to look through it, and after that, she'd just never found the courage. It felt easier to leave him folded up in cardboard than to see his handwriting again, his old dog tags, the parts of him that were still solid and real, even though he wasn't. But now, with everything crumbling around her, she pulled the box down anyway. She sat on the floor with it in her lap, the tape long since gone soft and peeling. Inside were the things she expected. His old dress uniform, carefully folded, a stack of photographs, some faded yellow with age, His dog tags, cool and heavy in her palm when she picked them up. And underneath all of it, an envelope. Her name was written across the front in her father's handwriting, the same handwriting from the birthday cards he used to leave on her pillow when she was little. Reese. Nothing else. No date, no explanation. Her chest tightened. She turned it over in her hands, feeling the weight of it, feeling how long it must have sat there, waiting for her to find it. She broke the seal carefully, like it might crumble if she moved too fast, and unfolded the single page inside. Reese. If you're reading this, it means I never found the right time to say what I need to say, which honestly sounds about right for me. I was never good with words. You know that better than anyone. I want to tell you about a man named Tank Morrison. We served together, a long time ago now. He saved my life once, pulled me out of a mess I never should have survived. I owe him more than I ever told him, and we lost touch after a stupid fight, over nothing, over something so small I can't even remember it now. That's the kind of thing pride does to people. It makes you forget what actually matters. I think about him sometimes. Wonder if he's still out there, riding with that motorcycle club he always talked about joining. Those men, the ones in the leather vests, the ones everybody's scared of before they get to know them, they understand something most people don't. They understand that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who choose to show up, who keep showing up, even when you tell them not to, even when you push them away because you're scared or proud or both. If Tank ever finds his way to you, let him in. Don't make the same mistake I made. Don't let pride cost you the people who are meant to stand beside you. I love you more than these words can say. Take care of my girl. Dad. Reese sat frozen on the floor, the letter trembling in her hands, tears sliding down her cheeks before she even realized she was crying. She thought about the parking lot, about Tank's arms carrying Daisy to the shade, about the fence he'd fixed at the daycare, the birthday party, the way he'd looked at her like she mattered, like she wasn't just a problem to be managed. She thought about the words she'd thrown at him 2 nights ago. You're not my father. Her father had known. Somehow, even without ever meeting Tank again, he had known exactly who he was. Reese wiped her face with the back of her hand, but the tears kept coming. She set the letter down on top of the box, careful, like it was something that might break, and reached for her phone with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking. She found Tank's name in her contacts. Her thumb hovered over it. 2 nights ago, she had screamed at this man. She had told him to get out. She had accused him of things she didn't even believe. Not really. But the words had come pouring out anyway because it was easier to be angry than to admit she was drowning. Now here she was, sitting on the floor of an apartment she was about to lose, holding her dead father's handwriting, and the only thing she could think was that she had almost thrown away exactly what he'd told her not to. She pressed call before she could talk herself out of it. It rang twice. Then his voice came through, careful, like he wasn't sure what he was walking into. Reese. Her throat closed up. For a second she couldn't say anything at all, and the silence stretched long enough that she heard him say her name again, softer this time. Reese, you there? I'm sorry, she said, and the words came out broken, cracking right down the middle. I'm so sorry, Tank. Hey, slow down. I found a letter. She pressed her palm against her eyes, like she could push the tears back in. From my dad. He wrote it a long time ago. I don't even know when. And he talked about you, Tank. He talked about you like he knew you'd come find me, and I pushed you away. I said all those horrible things, and I didn't mean any of it. I was just scared. Reese. I've been scared for months, she said, and now that the dam had broken, there was no stopping it. I've been so scared and so tired, and I didn't want anybody to know because if people knew, then it was real. And I thought if I just kept my head down and worked hard enough I could fix it myself. That's what I'm supposed to do. I'm her mother. I'm supposed to be able to do this on my own. But I can't do it anymore. And now we're losing the apartment and I don't know what to do and I'm sorry. I'm sorry I said you were trying to replace him. I know you're not. I know that's not what this is. She was crying too hard to keep going, the words dissolving into hiccuping breaths. On the other end of the line, Tank was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and steady, the same voice he'd used in the parking lot all those weeks ago, the one that had calmed Daisy down when nothing else could. I'm coming over. Tank, you don't have to. I'm already grabbing my keys. She heard movement on his end. A door, the low rumble of something being pushed aside. Don't move. I'll be there in 10 minutes. The line went dead before she could argue. Reese sat on the floor a while longer, the letter still open beside her, Danny's dog tags cool in her palm. She wrapped her fingers around them and held on, like they might steady her. And in a way they did. 10 minutes later, right on schedule, she heard the growl of his Harley pulling up outside, then boots on the stairs, fast, taking them 2 at a time. She was already at the door when he got there, and she didn't wait for him to knock. She pulled it open, and there he was, big and worn and familiar, his face full of worry, and something inside her just gave way. She stepped forward and let him wrap his arms around her, and for the first time in months, she let herself cry without trying to hide it, without trying to be strong, without trying to manage it or pack it into a box where nobody would see. I'm sorry, she said again, muffled against his jacket. Stop apologizing. His voice rumbled low above her head. You don't owe me an apology. You were drowning. I should have seen it sooner. I didn't want you to see it. I didn't want anybody to see it. I know. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his hands steady on her shoulders. But you don't have to carry this alone anymore. Things are about to change, Reese. I promise you that. She searched his face, saw something there she couldn't quite name, some quiet certainty. What do you mean? Not yet, he said, and there was the smallest hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. Just trust me a little longer. Can you do that? The next afternoon, Tank pulled up outside Reese's apartment on his Harley, but this time he wasn't alone. Preacher had followed behind in an old pickup truck, and in the back seat sat a car seat, waiting for Daisy. Where are we going? Reese asked, standing on the sidewalk with Daisy on her hip. The little girl was babbling about something, pointing at the motorcycle with wide eyes. Somewhere important, Tank said. Get her buckled in. I'll explain on the way. Reese hesitated, but something in his voice, that same steady calm from the night before, made her trust him. She strapped Daisy into the truck with Preacher, who grinned and made silly faces at the toddler until she squealed with laughter. Then Reese climbed onto the back of Tank's bike, wrapping her arms around his waist, and they pulled out onto the road, the truck following close behind. They rode for 20 minutes, past the edge of town, past streets Reese didn't recognize, until the buildings thinned out and gave way to quiet neighborhoods with trees and small yards. Tank finally slowed down and pulled over to the side of the road, cutting the engine. There's something you need to know, he said, turning to look at her as she climbed off the bike. Something the club's been doing for a long time now, longer than you'd guess. What kind of something? Years back, some of us who served, we got tired of watching veterans' families struggle, watching widows and kids get left behind while everybody forgot the ones who gave everything. He rubbed the back of his neck, looking almost embarrassed. So we started fixing up houses, buying them cheap when we could, fixing them up with our own hands, giving them to families who earned it. Nobody talks about it much. We don't do it for credit. Reese stared at him, her mind struggling to catch up. You're telling me you built houses for veterans' families? For years now. Quiet-like. Diesel's the one who started it, but we all pitch in. He paused, and something shifted in his face, something softer. Your dad was airborne, Reese. He served his country. That means you qualify, same as any other family we've helped. But that's not even the real reason. Then what is? Because a few days before you got that eviction notice, we'd already started on a house for you. Before any of that happened. I've been planning it since the barbecue, working on it in secret, hoping to surprise you once it was finished. Reese's breath caught. You started before I even knew I was losing the apartment? Preacher and Diesel and half the club. We've been out there every weekend for over a month, tearing out old carpet, fixing wiring, painting walls. Tank's voice grew quiet. I wanted to do something for you and Daisy that would last. Something real. Not because I felt sorry for you, because your dad would have done the same for my family if things had gone different. This is me trying to pay that back. Preacher pulled the truck up behind them, and Daisy's little voice rang out from the back seat, asking for her mama. Reese wiped at her eyes, though this time the tears felt different, lighter somehow. Come on, Tank said, nodding towards the truck. It's just up the road. They drove another few minutes, turning down a quiet street lined with maple trees, until Tank slowed the bike and came to a stop in front of a small house. It was modest, painted a soft yellow that caught the afternoon sun, with white shutters and a porch that wrapped around the side. Flowers had been planted along the front walkway, purple and yellow blooms swaying gently in the breeze. And leading up to the front door was a smooth wooden ramp, built with careful, steady hands, wide enough for a wheelchair, sturdy enough to last decades. Reese stood frozen on the sidewalk, Daisy now back in her arms, staring at the house like she couldn't quite believe it was real. Her mind reached for the word charity, the word she'd spent months running from, the word that made her chest tighten with shame. But standing there, looking at the ramp Tank had built with his own hands, looking at the house that carried her father's memory inside its walls before she'd even stepped through the door, she realized this wasn't charity at all. Reese set Daisy down gently on the grass, and the little girl toddled toward a purple flower, reaching out to touch its petals. Reese's eyes drifted back to the ramp, tracing its careful angle from the porch down to the walkway. Her brow furrowed. Tank, she said slowly. Neither me nor Daisy needs a ramp. Tank stood there, hands in his pockets, saying nothing. So why build one? She stepped closer to it, running her fingers along the smooth wood railing. Whoever built this had sanded every inch until it was soft as glass. No splinters, no rough edges. It was the kind of work that took hours, maybe days, done by someone who cared more about getting it right than getting it done fast. It's just good building, Tank said, but his voice came out too quick, too clipped. Reese turned to look at him. Tank. He rubbed the back of his neck, that same nervous habit she'd seen before. But this time his jaw was tight, his eyes fixed somewhere past her shoulder, out toward the maple trees lining the street. There's things about me, he said finally, that the club doesn't even know. She waited. Daisy giggled somewhere behind them, chasing a bumblebee that had wandered too close to the flowers, but Reese didn't turn to check on her. Something in Tank's voice held her still. Back in the service, he said, before Danny and I had our falling out, before any of that, there was an accident. Training exercise gone wrong. I don't talk about it, ever. He paused, swallowing hard. Took shrapnel in my hip and my leg. Doctor said I was lucky to walk again at all. Reese's chest tightened. Tank, I didn't know. Nobody knows. Not Preacher, not Diesel, Not one soul in that clubhouse." His voice was rough now, like the words were dragging themselves out of someplace deep and locked away. "Some mornings I can barely get out of bed. Some days the pain's so bad I have to grit my teeth just to walk across a parking lot without anybody noticing. I've spent 20 years making sure nobody notices." "Why?" Reese asked softly. "Why hide it?" Tank was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped lower, rawer. "Because guys like me were supposed to be strong. That's the whole point of the vest, the bike, all of it. You show weakness, people stop trusting you to have their back." He shook his head. "But building this ramp, I don't know. Felt like maybe I was building it for myself too. A reminder that it's all right to need help sometimes, even for someone like me." Reese felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been closed tight for longer than she could remember. She thought of all the nights she'd sat alone in her apartment, too proud to call anyone, too ashamed to admit she was drowning. She thought of the eviction notice crumpled in her fist, the shame burning through her like fire. And here was Tank, this mountain of a man with tattoos up his arms and a Harley that shook the ground, admitting the exact same fear she'd been carrying all along. She didn't think. She just closed the distance between them and wrapped her arms around him, pulling him into a hug that said more than words ever could. Tank stiffened for half a second, surprised, before his arms came up around her, careful and gentle, like he was afraid of breaking something precious. "Thank you," Reese whispered against his shoulder, "for trusting me with that." "Thank you," Tank said back, "for not making me feel small for needing to say it." They stood there for a long moment on the porch, the late afternoon sun sliding lower behind the maple trees, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and gold. Daisy's laughter drifted up from the yard, light and easy, the sound of a little girl completely unaware of how much had just shifted between the two grown-ups standing above her. The wood of the ramp beneath their feet held steady, built strong enough to carry whatever weight might come. And for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, neither Tank nor Reese felt like they were carrying it alone. The following Saturday, the street in front of the little house was lined with motorcycles as far as the eye could see. Chrome caught the morning sun, and the low rumble of engines had faded into the happy noise of a real celebration. Someone had strung streamers from the porch railing, purple and yellow, Daisy's favorite colors, and a folding table sagged under the weight of covered dishes that neighbors had carried over all morning. Preacher stood by the grill, flipping burgers with a spatula that looked too small in his big hand. Diesel was in the front yard, laughing with a group of dads from Daisy's daycare, all of them looking a little nervous around the leather vests, until Diesel cracked a joke, and the ice melted completely. Kids ran through the yard in a game that seemed to have no rules except running and screaming with joy. Daisy was in the middle of it, her curls bouncing, her small hand gripping the hand of a little boy from her class, like they'd been best friends forever. Reese stood near the porch steps, arms crossed over her chest, not from nerves this time, but from trying to hold herself together. She kept looking at the house. Her house. The porch swing Tank had hung last week creaked gently in the breeze. The flower beds along the walkway were freshly planted, purple petunias nodding in neat rows. "You ready?" Tank asked, stepping up beside her. He had a small velvet box in his hand, but she didn't notice it yet. Her eyes were still on the crowd, on the strangers who weren't strangers anymore. "I don't know how to say thank you for something like this," she said. "There aren't words big enough." "You don't have to say anything," Tank said. "Just take the keys." Diesel walked over then, holding out a set of shining brass keys tied with a little ribbon Daisy had picked out herself. Purple, of course. He pressed them into Reese's palms, and the whole yard erupted into applause. Reese felt her throat tighten, her eyes stinging, and she laughed through the tears that came anyway, unable to hold them back. "Welcome home, Reese Calloway," Diesel said, his gruff voice softer than she'd ever heard it. The party rolled on for another hour, full of laughter and second helpings, and Daisy showing off her new bedroom to anyone who would follow her up the stairs. Slowly, as the sun dipped lower, the crowd began to thin. Neighbors wandered back to their own homes. The daycare families packed up strollers and diaper bags. The bikers loaded their saddlebags, clapping a Tank on the shoulder before rumbling off one by one until the street was quiet again. Tank stayed behind. He found Reese sitting on the porch swing, watching Daisy chase fireflies in the front yard as the sky turned a deep, soft blue. He sat down beside her, the chains creaking under his weight, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. Then Tank reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small, something he'd carried for over 20 years. A set of dog tags, the metal worn smooth from years of handling, the chain a little tarnished but still strong. "These were your father's," he said quietly, placing them gently into her open hands. "He gave them to me the night before I shipped out early, after the accident. Said a soldier without his tags isn't a soldier at all. Said I needed them more than he did that day." Tank's voice caught, just slightly. "I always meant to give them back to him. Never got the chance." Reese's fingers closed around the tags, the metal warm from being so close to Tank's heart for so many years. "He talked about you," Tank went on. "More than you probably knew. Told everybody who'd listen about the daughter he had waiting back home. Said you were going to do great things." He looked at her, his eyes glassy in the fading light. He was right. Reese pressed the tags to her chest, tears sliding freely down her cheeks now. But she was smiling wider than she had in years. Weeks passed, and the little house on Maple Street stopped feeling new and started feeling like home. Reese noticed it in small ways. The way she didn't have to think twice before turning the key in the front door anymore. The way Daisy's crayon drawings covered the refrigerator, held up with mismatched magnets. The way the creak of the porch swing had become a sound she loved, instead of a reminder of everything she didn't have. The kitchen smelled like garlic and butter most evenings now, because Reese had finally started cooking again. Real meals, not just whatever she could scrape together between shifts. Tonight she was making spaghetti, Daisy's favorite, stirring a pot of sauce that bubbled soft and slow on the stove. Life had changed so much that sometimes Reese caught herself standing still in the middle of a room, just breathing it in. The diner had changed, too. 2 weeks after the housewarming party, her boss had called her into the back office, looking nervous in a way that made Reese's stomach drop, certain she was about to be let go. Instead, he'd slid a piece of paper across the desk. A promotion. Manager. Better hours, better pay, and weekends off more often than not. Diesel's wife put in a good word, he'd admitted, scratching the back of his neck. Said you were the hardest worker she'd ever met, and she'd fire me herself if I didn't recognize it. Reese had laughed so hard she'd nearly cried right there in his office. She didn't know Diesel's wife well, not yet, but she'd made a mental note to bake her something as a thank you. Maybe 2 somethings. Now, with steady work and a roof that was truly hers, the fear that used to sit in her chest like a stone had finally started to loosen its grip. She still worked hard. She still counted her pennies some months. But she wasn't drowning anymore. She was just living. Daisy had changed, too, blooming in the space of the new house like a flower finally given enough sun. She had a room of her own now, painted a soft yellow that she'd picked out herself. Standing in the paint aisle at the hardware store, pointing with total confidence, like she'd known her whole life which color she wanted. She had a backyard to run in. She had neighbors' kids to play with. Her laughter, loud and easy, filled the house in a way that made Reese's heart ache with happiness every single time she heard it. The doorbell rang just as Reese was draining the pasta into the colander, steam rising up around her face. "Daisy, can you get that, baby?" she called out, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Little feet pounded across the floor, faster than any 3-year-old had a right to move. Reese heard the door swing open, heard the familiar deep rumble of a voice greeting her daughter, and she smiled to herself before she even turned around. Tank had become a fixture in their lives these past few weeks, dropping by for dinner most Thursdays, sometimes bringing a toolbox to fix something around the house that didn't even need fixing, just so he'd have an excuse to stay a little longer. He never overstayed his welcome. He never made Reese feel like she owed him anything. He just showed up, steady and constant, the way Reese imagined a father should. She turned from the stove in time to see Daisy barreling across the living room, arms outstretched, her little sneakers squeaking against the wood floor. Tank knelt down just in time to catch her, scooping her up into a hug that swallowed her whole against his broad chest. "Uncle Tank," Daisy squealed, her small arms wrapping tight around his neck. Reese froze, the dish towel slipping from her fingers. It was the first time Daisy had ever called him that. Not Tank, not the motorcycle man, but Uncle Tank, said with the kind of easy, unquestioning love that only a child could give so freely. Tank went still for a moment, too, his eyes flicking up to meet Reese's over the top of Daisy's curls. Something passed between them, something too big for words, gratitude and grief and joy all tangled together. Reese felt her throat tighten, tears pricking hot behind her eyes. But she was smiling so wide her cheeks ached with it. "Well," Tank said, his voice a little rough as he pressed a kiss to the top of Daisy's head. "Hey there, kiddo." Reese wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, laughing through the tears, watching the two of them together in the doorway of the home that had finally, truly become theirs. The sun hung warm and gold over Maple Street, the kind of afternoon that made the whole world smell like cut grass and summer. Reese sat on the porch steps, a glass of lemonade sweating in her hand, watching the scene unfold in the front yard with a smile she couldn't have wiped off if she tried. Tank knelt in the grass beside a small pink bicycle, its handlebars wrapped in purple streamers that Daisy had picked out herself. Training wheels lay discarded in the grass nearby, tossed aside the week before when Daisy had declared, with all the confidence of a 3-year-old who had just turned 4, that she was a big girl now and didn't need them anymore. "Okay, kiddo," Tank said, his big hands adjusting the seat one more time. "You remember what we talked about?" Daisy nodded so hard her pigtails bounced. "Pedal fast and don't look down. That's my girl." Tank's voice was gruff, but there was a softness underneath it that had grown there over the months, the kind of softness that only showed up around this particular little girl. He held the back of the bicycle seat steady while Daisy climbed on, her sneakers finding the pedals with the wobbly determination of someone about to do something brave. In the distance, past the fence line and the row of maple trees just starting to whisper with a light breeze, the clubhouse sat quiet on its gravel lot. A few motorcycles gleamed in the sun outside it, and somewhere over there Preacher was probably tuning an engine, and Diesel was probably arguing with someone about barbecue sauce. But here, in this yard, the only thing that mattered was one little girl and one big, gentle man who never once let go until she was ready. "You got her, Tank?" Reese called from the porch, though she already knew the answer. She always knew the answer with him. "Always," Tank called back, not even turning his head, his eyes fixed on Daisy like she was the only thing in the world worth watching. He started walking, then jogging, one hand still on the seat, the other hovering close but not touching. Daisy's little legs pumped the pedals, wobbly at first, the bike swerving left and then right like it couldn't decide which way it wanted to go. Tank kept pace easily, his boots thudding against the pavement, his breath steady despite the effort. "You're doing it!" he shouted. "You're doing it, Daisy!" And then, like magic, the wobbling stopped. The bike found its balance, straight and true, and Daisy's legs kept pumping without any hesitation at all. Tank's hand slipped from the seat so gently that Daisy never even noticed. She was riding on her own. "I'm doing it! Uncle Tank, look, I'm doing it!" Her voice rang out across the yard, high and bright and full of pure, uncomplicated joy. She pedaled down the sidewalk in front of the house, her purple streamers flying out behind her like ribbons of light. And Tank ran alongside her anyway, close enough to catch her if she fell, far enough to let her feel like she was flying all on her own. Reese stood up from the porch steps, her hand pressed against her chest, laughing and crying all at once, the way she seemed to do so often these days. She watched her daughter ride free down the street she now called home, past the mailbox with their name on it, past the flower beds she'd planted with her own 2 hands, past a life she never thought she'd get to have. Tank slowed to a stop, hands on his knees, breathing hard, grinning so wide it looked like it might crack his weathered face in 2. He watched Daisy circle back around at the end of the block, still pedaling, still laughing, the sound of her joy carrying across the warm afternoon air like music. For just a moment, Tank looked up, past the maple trees, past the rooftops, up towards the wide open blue of the summer sky. "Thank you, brother," he thought, the words quiet and steady in his chest. "I found the family you always said I needed. Guess you knew all along." Down the street, Daisy's laughter rang out again, bright and fearless, as she pedaled toward the house that love had built. I hope you liked this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.